Have you ever tried chili and dark chocolate together? One is spicy and intense, the other is mellow, bitter, and just a little bit sweet. You wouldn't think this weird pairing would taste nice at all, but amazingly, it kinda does. The chili cuts through the sickliness of the chocolate, and the chocolate tempers the chili's heat to make something that's much nicer than the sum of its parts. Now, what does this have to do with video games? Well, I'm glad you asked, because although video games don't yet come in edible form, they can be thought about in the same sort of way. By combining different types and genres of games together, we can create brand new experiences. Whether that's Rise to Ruin, which combines city builders and tower defense, requiring you build progressively more and more elaborate defenses to keep your constantly growing and resource-hungry towns safe. Or Northgard, which compresses the kind of long-term 4x strategy you'd normally find in a marathon-length turn-based game like Civilization down into about an hour and a half by borrowing mechanics from real-time strategy games like Starcraft. The problem is though, is that these genre mashups don't always work out well, particularly in the AAA space. Mass Effect, a series that is 3/4 great, is an excellent example of this problem. The franchise, for those who don't know, prides itself on being a mix between character-focused narrative and third-person shooter horde combat, which ends up being a little bit of a problem. You're forced to murder dozens of sentient creatures with lives, hopes and dreams without a care in the world, only for the gameplay to abruptly come to a stop to try and get you to debate whether sparing a single life is the right thing to do. You can have a nuanced debate about the true nature of justice and law as it relates to morality with Garrus, but regardless of the results of that conversation, he's gonna shoot dudes just the same. These two elements are great on their own, but they just don't mix very well, and Mass Effect isn't alone here. Assassin's Creed's dabblings in management gameplay or RPG systems were never bad. I mean, they certainly weren't great either, but they robbed the games of a lot of their unique identity and feel without really doing much interesting stuff with the new mechanical space. In games that pull in multiple genres, there's a greater variety of things going on, and they probably appeal to more people as a result, but the price they pay is that they're less focused, and to be blunt, blander than a more singular experience. Needless to say, I've got my issues with this mishmash style of game design, but it might surprise you to know that I actually love games that hybridize different genres together, so long as they do it well. For example, the brilliantly cute Yoku's Island Express is an unlikely fusion of a Metroidvania and a pinball game. You play as Yoku and this massive ball he's attached to, and you've got to explore an island which is made up of a variety of pinball boards, gradually unlocking new abilities to travel to new areas. And this is where Yoku really distinguishes itself. Unlike Super Metroid, Hollow Knight, and any number of other classic Metroidvanias, Yoku's unlockable abilities aren't bound by the fact that they need to have combat application, because pinball games don't really need enemies. The board itself is the obstacle. This really frees the developers up to lean into creative, movement-based unlockables that give the game a unique, whimsical feel, while still staying true to the joy of exploration that's key to the Metroidvania's appeal. Katana Zero is another really interesting example. Styling itself as a mix between ultra-hard, old-school 2D action games like Hotline Miami, Cuphead, and Ninja Gaiden, but also with a strong influence from narrative, dialogue-driven games. The end result is some of the juiciest, punchiest text boxes I've ever seen, where you can interrupt someone talking to get a unique response. It's a brilliant synthesis of two very disparate genres that lets the game seamlessly transition from high-intensity action to some gripping cyberpunk grime without missing a beat and keeping up an impressive tempo all the way through. Both games are comprised of two seemingly unrelated halves, but by finding a middle ground between them, the devs of Katana Zero and Yoku's Island Express were able to make something that feels familiar, but neither genre could accomplish alone. And this is why genre fusions are so important. While they're difficult to pull off well, they can be used to create utterly new experiences that allow us to see tried and tested formulas in a new light, as well as learn something about ourselves. But I'm getting ahead of myself there. The trick to making a great genre fusion isn't to make them broader, more generic experiences, but instead to go the other way and focus down on a particular element that each constituent genre shares. To explain what I mean, let's take a look at the roguelike genre, which has seen an explosion of genre fusions recently, and how it was successfully hybridized with Arcane's Prey to produce a much better game than the original. Prey, that is the base game, no not that one, this one, was a game released a few years ago, and was about as pure of an immersive sim as you could get. It's got hacking, it's got non-linear level design, and of course it's got the most important part of an immersive sim, sneaking around in vents. The game is okay. It's got some very fun ideas and the setting is interesting, but I always felt like it was being held back a little bit by adhering to the principles of the genre a little bit too rigidly. The addition of human characters you can deal with lethally or non-lethally felt pretty arbitrary. Getting around Talos 1 was a bit boring once you knew where to go, and the emergent combat mechanics like physics objects or enemy lures were fun, but they were just way less powerful than more conventional and boring methods of dealing with enemies. So what changed with Mooncrash? Well, first of all, there's permadeath. Pre-Mooncrash is set in a simulation, and so when you die, you just have to boot it up again, meaning you'll go back to nothing but your crappy wrench. This prevents players from stockpiling good weapons and forces them to rely on cool, fun emergent systems like EMPing robotic enemies or setting off explosive barrels, which require some really satisfying systemic knowledge to pull off reliably. Each time you die, the Pythos Moonbase's layout also gets shuffled around randomly. Some areas will have hazards like radiation, others will be without power, some might have a dust storm, and each run will have different routes and transport networks locked off by rubble. Loot spawns also get mostly randomised, with a few exceptions like this jetpack. These random elements pose interesting challenges to the player that test not their memorisation of the optimal route and techniques, but their ability to work on their feet and use their knowledge of the mechanics to succeed. The Huntress Boltcaster, a near useless weapon in the original game owing to the easy availability of guns that actually do damage, becomes a vital lifeline for distracting enemies in Mooncrash, because more often than not, you won't have the firepower, ammo or time needed to deal with a threat like a telepath. As you may have noticed, many of these elements and situations are stolen straight from classic roguelikes like Angband or Dungeon Crawl Stone Soup. However, rather than adding a new gameplay theme that competes with everything else Mooncrash has going on, they actually harmonise with and supplement the immersive sim mechanics to focus the game in on systemic and mechanical mastery. Rich Wilson, Arcane's lead level designer, says it best.
And so why did we pick the roguelike genre specifically? A big part of it also is the kinship between the genres. So roguelikes generally rely heavily on a player's internalization of systems. They don't rely on route memorization, and they generally allow for expressive players in emergent situations. And a lot of those core values really speak to what we do in immersive sims as well, so there was a lot of overlap there.
And it's that overlap that's really important, because in finding a single gameplay theme that both roguelikes and immersive sims look at differently, you can combine the two to make something unique and special. In this case, the fusion of roguelike and immersive sim manifests in the form of Mooncrash's 5 playable characters, all of which occupy the same world. For example, a shotgun picked up by VJ the security officer won't be there when Andreas the test subject might need it. This meta-level resource management combines the small-scale improvisation and consequential choices of a roguelike with the broader, more abstract systemic and spatial knowledge that's core to the best immersive sims into something that's completely new and creates great puzzles where you have to work together across lives to make sure each of the survivors can make it out alive. The best way to make a genre fusion work is to find these areas of overlap, because they're going to be the best way you can create a singular but unique identity out of 2 or more disparate elements. Slay the Spire, despite still being half roguelike, creates a very different experience than Mooncrash, focusing on the roguelike's love of risk and reacting to unexpected opportunities, something it shares with drafting modes in games like Magic the Gathering. Spelunky is different again, this time themed around high pressure, split-second choices also found in tricky platformers. Each of these titles are easily recognisable as both a roguelike and their other parent genre, but have an identity and feel all their own, and it's important to really zero in on what exactly that is. The roguelike, whilst being a great example for this video, isn't the only genre which has been fused en masse recently. Match 3 games like Bejeweled have shown a similar sort of divergence. Battle Chef Brigade mixes things up with 2D brawler influences to create a game that revolves around time pressure and flow-statey combo creation to simulate the feeling of high-intensity restaurant work. Puzzle Quest and You Have to Build a Boat layer in RPG and strategy game elements to turn the tactical appeal of thinking a few moves ahead into something much more taxing, with players now being forced to plan several games ahead to maximise efficiency. Of course, you've also got Honeypop, which is a crappy porn game mixed with a match 3 because, from a certain point of view, they've both got elements of manual dexterity involved. Sometimes, when looking for an overlap between 2 or more genres, the answer is right there in front of you. In Sanctum, a shooter/tower defense game, the crossover is, you guessed it, shooting at stuff. And so you have to make a game where on top of building mazes and setting up fortifications, you've also got to run around helping to defend areas yourself. And there's stuff like armoured enemies your towers can't hit, or bosses that can destroy your maze mid-level, creating openings you've got to defend, that really bring the two together into a nice blend of strategy and split-second tactics. Easy stuff. However, while I reckon you can successfully fuse basically any combination of genres, sometimes the connection between them is less obvious. a lot of the time it helps to look not at the mechanics they share, but the kinds of ways they test the player and get them to think or feel. For example, platformers, adventure games, and a sprinkling of RPGs are a genre mashup that more or less forms the basis of the modern day Metroidvania, and can be united around a fundamental feeling of discovery and personal growth, a central theme that informs everything from Symphony of the Night to Metroid Prime. And yes, that does mean that Yoku's Island Express is like a fusion of probably a fusion. Genres are weird. Portal and its spiritual predecessor Narbacular Drop, a fusion of first-person games and puzzlers, would also be a great example of this. These two games deal primarily with paying attention to your surroundings and your changing perspective, both in the sense that the first-person viewpoint means you've got to look around and observe the environment to find out what to do, but also in the sense that level elements can serve unexpected functions when looked at through the lens of your portal gun. For example, large drops can be used as catapults to launch you across the level, and weighted boxes can be used as a weapon. As more and more games have copied Portal and carried on the genre-fusing tradition it established, some of games like The Witness and Antichamber carried on the trend of games that are, fundamentally, about perspective. Antichamber uses mind-bending physics to get you to see puzzles differently, and The Witness's best levels are all about using environmental features to fill in, block, or create new bits of each of its grids. Genre fusions are a great way for developers to create new and interesting kinds of games, whilst building off established formats and mechanics. But these kinds of games are just as important for people on the other side of the screen. Besides being, well, fun, genre fusions can be a great resource for a bit of introspection, as we can use them to better understand why we like particular titles and why others can't hold our attention. To continue along the first-person shooter theme, Borderlands is another genre fusion that this time incorporates role-playing games. The franchise really goes all in on a visceral sense of empowerment, with guns shooting colourful particle effects everywhere and the RPG stats all scaling exponentially to give you the constant feeling that you're a walking badass who deserves to be showered in shiny loot at all times. Unfortunately, in order to encourage players to chase ever shinier and more powerful guns, battles can't be won with fancy gunplay alone. Enemies just have too much health and deal just too much damage. That means that, to me at least, Borderlands combat comes across as a bit shallow and lacking in the kind of moment-to-moment tactical flair as some of my favourite RPGs. Conversely, I am a massive fan of Souls-like games like Dark Souls, and yes, Demon Souls, you don't have to mention it every time. Souls-like started off life as another RPG genre fusion, this time borrowing elements of spectacle-based and difficult action games like Shadow of the Colossus. Here, it's tiny decisions like whether to roll, parry, or to sneak in another hit that make the difference between glorious victory and many crushing defeats, with bosses requiring persistence, reactions, and a good sense of tactics to take down. Gear and stats are mostly an afterthought, with player skill taking the forefront. It was only by looking at games that exaggerate particular elements of the RPG genre that I could figure out why I enjoy it so much in the first place. I like decisions that matter and high-stakes gameplay, while I'm not so fussed about number crunching or escapism. Other people, however, might feel the complete opposite way, but they'll only find out for sure by experimenting and playing lots of different kinds of games. It's this knowledge that makes it so important to broaden our horizons, because it's actually a great way of getting us to appreciate the games we already love. For example, analysing my love of Terraria and Subnautica, two survival game genre fusions over the last year or so, made it great fun to go back to Minecraft after a long time away and get stuck into its brilliant sense of discovery. Not every game should be a genre fusion, nor should people force themselves to stray outside their comfort zones if they like particular games just the way they are. But the main thing to take away from this look at how we can smush games together in weird and wonderful ways is to understand that it's only by experimenting and figuring out how games are put together that we can come up with cool new concepts that may become established genres of their own, but also how we can learn to make games we already have even better. So the next time you're eating boring peasant food like bacon or cake, just think about how much better I am than you as I tuck into my delicious fusion meal of wasabi, condensed milk, and veal with some bleach on the side. Yum. Hello, and thank you for watching. This is a video that I've had kicking around for a little while, but it got shunted to the front of the queue after Mark Brown of Game Maker's Toolkit decided to release a video with the exact same topic as the one I was working on, so here we are. Hope you enjoyed me talking about Prey again. It's good, I promise. With that news out of the way, time for me to plug a YouTube channel, and this time it's not going to be a gaming one, but a comedy one. Cracker Milk is a great sketch channel from Down Under, and after watching their best video named Handbag Goblin, I have been a devout viewer ever since. Please go check these very funny people out. And last but not least, what would an Architect of Games post-video credits section be like without a Patreon thank you? If you'd like to support the channel and get special bonuses like cut content, early access and monthly updates, feel free to head on over to patreon.com/architectofgames to give me some dosh. Top tier supporters also get thanked by name, and they are Alex Deloch, Asaran, Alno94, Baxter Heel, Brian Notariani, Calvin Han, Colin Herman, Chill, Daniel Metjes, Dirk Jan Karambeld, Feetsalot, Jesse Ryan, Jonathan Christensen, Joshua Binswanger, Lucas Slack, Lunar Eagle 1996, Mace Window 54, Manuki, Patrick Romberg, Philby the Bilby, Ray's Dad, Samuel Vanderplatz, Strateger in Ultima, Yara Mirren, and Chow. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for sticking around for these credits sections. I know that they're a bit weird. I know I don't really do them very professionally. I hope you enjoy them, I guess, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!